Hello. Today, we are going to be talking about the vision and mission of Little Learner Spectrum Center, as well as the Reggio Emilia model of early childhood education that we employ here at our school. Let's dive in. My name is Allison Grifford. I have a bachelor's degree in sociology with a minor in English and a minor in child studies. I began working in early childhood education in 2019, and I have been with Little Learners since 2023. I began as a lead classroom teacher at Little Learners, working with 4 and 5-year-old students, though I have concentrated experience working with students aged 2 through 5. I began by working alone in a 1-to-10 ratio before we transitioned to our larger center, wherein I worked in a higher ratio environment of 2 to 20. In January of 2026, I was officially promoted to a directorial position. I believe that children learn best when they are respected as capable, curious individuals, and when educators approach teaching as a collaborative process rather than a one-way transfer of knowledge. At Little Learners, I found a vision and mission that mirrored my own philosophy of early childhood education. Here, we believe that every child is strong, capable, and full of potential. Rooted in the Reggio Emilia approach, we partner with families and the community to create an inclusive, reflective environment where children can co-construct knowledge through exploration, play, and meaningful relationships. Because our mission is rooted in the Reggio Emilia approach, it is important that every member of our team understands the principles that guide our work. Let's explore some of the key practices that shape our classrooms. Reggio Emilia is informed, but not limited to, 6 key practices. We will begin by exploring the first. In the Reggio Emilia approach, there are 3 conceptions of educators, or teachers as we may know them. The first is the teacher as the guide. The second is the child themselves. And the third is the environment. To understand this, we will begin by exploring the concept of the environment as the third teacher, meaning that learning environments take on the role of one of the main and necessary educators. While traditional educators, teachers, remain an essential part of the child's early educational journey, the environment is the conduit of learning. The environment, of course, being facilitated, maintained, and prepared by the educators. While educators establish goals, prepare experiences, and ensure developmental growth, they do not view learning as something delivered to children. Rather, they guide, scaffold, observe, and respond to children's interests and emerging understandings. Our classroom environment, inspired by the Reggio Emilia approach, is explicitly designed to invite students to explore, investigate, experiment, and ask questions about the world around them. In doing so, we can begin to see the reasoning behind the environment as the third teacher. When an environment is intentionally designed to spark wonder and curiosity, children are able to pursue their interests and take an active role in their learning. In this way, the environment becomes more than a place where learning happens. It becomes a teacher itself. It provides the necessary resources and provocations to encourage the early learning that is imperative for this approach. The teacher, then, is not how we may think of them traditionally. A teacher at our facility is not a figure who directs educational goals and implements rote learning. Rather, they are a consistent, steady source who prepares a space in which children can explore and learn in their own right. They guide students by way of open-ended questions that prompt critical thinking, encourage their students in a fashion that recognizes the child as a participant in their own educational journey, and they document the explorations and communication of each child in their classroom. For example, rather than setting out a worksheet on color mixing, we might provide a quote-unquote provocation setup, including paint, clear cups, droppers, and primary colors. Children can investigate, make predictions, and discover new colors on their own, while the educator observes, asks questions, and documents their thinking. I will now give you a minute to look at some examples of a Reggio Emilia-inspired environment, as well as some examples of provocations. You will notice that a Reggio Emilia-style environment uses a more homey setup than a traditional classroom space. The environment is set up to simulate the feeling of a household for the child. With that in mind, you will also notice that all materials in the room are accessible and on the child's level. This allows for the educational agency that Reggio Emilia promotes. Moreover, we utilize muted tones to decrease overstimulation, and we include nature-based materials to help students connect with their environment and the world around them. Take a minute to observe these provocations. Do you notice that they are supported by written words? Can you see how they require hands-on manipulation as opposed to being worksheet-based? Can you identify how these stations would encourage students to play, ask questions, and explore? The best provocations encourage students to experiment, ask questions, and/or provide open-ended opportunities for play. This brings us to our second key practice: understanding, acknowledging, and appreciating the 100 languages of children. In order for the primary educator or guide to understand and facilitate natural learning by way of the environment, educators must be prepared to meet students at their level. They must be attuned to the communication of the child, and this is conceptualized by the term, the 100 languages. We begin with the notion that every child brings with them deep curiosity and potential that drives their interest to understand their world and their place within it. To express this, children have a variety of ways to communicate their thoughts and feelings, which is why we are able to extend the term language to the different ways that children use to represent, communicate, and express their thoughts through the different media and symbolic systems available to them. Because these languages are so varied and distinct, this is where the adult educator gets the opportunity to use their guidance, knowledge, and understanding to hear and encourage their students in whichever way they choose to express themselves. For example, one child may communicate an idea through drawing, another through dramatic play, another through constructing with blocks, and another through movement, all of which are expressive forms of communication and related to their cultural and social experiences. Each of these expressions provides valuable insight into their thinking. The children's expressions, then, are facilitated by the environment, their peers, and of course, their educational guide. Observing the expressions and interactions of the students in their care, educators must seek to understand the 100 languages of children, acting as recorders or documenters for the children, helping them trace and revisit their words and actions, and thereby making the learning visible. Once educators understand the many ways that children in their care express their thinking, we need a way to capture and study those expressions. This is where documentation becomes essential. Documentation of these expressions is the third key practice in the Reggio Emilia approach. Our educators do not direct learning, as explained previously. They are guides, teacher researchers, who utilize pedagogical documentation, which researchers describe as the intentional collection of notes, photographs, conversations, and observations that make children's learning visible, to explore the languages and strategies utilized by their students in order to best inform themselves, the teacher. The teacher uses documentation as a foundation for growth and development. It is the life source that informs the provocations and the learning environment that the teacher cultivates, which in turn gives students the opportunity to explore the varied pathways they are naturally drawn to, so as to expand their own knowledge and understanding. Documentation is not limited to a notebook or parental communication. Rather, it is visible. Teachers post photos of the students interacting with their classroom space. They pair artwork with a written description of the child's own words, body language, and actions displayed while they created it. And they use these documentations as an extension of the learning environment, calling back to visible recollections as they guide their students toward educational growth. Documentation is only meaningful, however, when it is grounded in a strong image of the child, wherein they are seen as capable, competent, and worthy of being listened to. This leads us to our fourth key practice of Reggio Emilia. In relation to children, our mission statement declares that we see every child as strong, capable, and full of potential, which is a concept directly informed by the Reggio Emilia concept, the image of the child. Educators informed by Reggio have an image of the competent child, meaning the idea that children are able to construct complex communications and interactions thanks to a plurality of languages. With this wording, we can recognize that the 100 languages does not make children or students limited. It is an extension of their competence. While they may not communicate in exactly the same manner as adults, their thoughts, feelings, and explorations are just as valuable as any person's. When our educators see this in a child, documentation becomes an extension of this concept. For example, we do not then witness a child pretending to play grocery store with their peer and think that this has little to no importance. Instead, we recognize that the children are exploring the concept of social interaction, replicating the modeled behavior of adults, practicing cultural norms, and exploring interpersonal communication. When we view children as capable and competent, our role changes. Rather than interrupting or redirecting their play, we observe closely, ask thoughtful questions, and look for opportunities to extend their thinking and exploration. When we shift our mindset of the child, then, the ramifications of their interactions and expressions mean so much more. Using the image of the child as a conceptual launching point, we can begin to recognize the importance and value of the fifth key practice in Reggio Emilia, negotiated learning. The meaning of negotiated learning has to do with the process of ideas and theories negotiation that allows children to co-construct their learning through social interaction. Let's dive into that a little bit more. Collaboration in the child's community is central to Reggio Emilia. The learning that is had takes place through relationships and the interpersonal communication therein. Moreover, as children are seen as capable and competent under the model of Reggio Emilia, students are provided with more agency over their educational path than what we would traditionally see in a classroom setting. You may think of negotiated learning as collaboration between the teacher and the students. Rather than a one-way transfer of knowledge from teacher to student, students choose their own pathways. This can be done by involving students in activity planning, or simply by allowing them control over their own learning pathways. This would be represented, of course, through the environment. Provocations, such as the watercolor example, would be set out for students, and rather than guide them by way of directing, as in, "Oh, now it's time to move to our water play table," students would instead move independently from station to station. Teachers would respect the child's agency in their choice of learning activity, and would use documentation to determine the explicit interests of the child in order to provide them with further resources to continue their educational growth as the child themselves chooses to pursue it. It is the process of learning that is respected at our center, not the product. This negotiated process leads us to our sixth and final key practice of Reggio Emilia. Using the information we have learned so far, we know that the environment facilitates learning. Play-based and explorative interactions with the environment supports natural learning. Documentation, alongside open-ended questions and review, supports upward growth as the educator guides students. The strong image of the child, as conceived of in Reggio Emilia, informs the practice of understanding that the student's expressions are important and go beyond simple play. And negotiated learning allows students to have agency over their own educational pathways. When we have this mindset, it becomes easy to see why long-term projects are the sixth key practice of Reggio Emilia, especially when we hold true to a process over product baseline. Long-term projects, like accessible visible documentation, provide students with a physical representation of their own educational growth. Moreover, they breed collaboration between students, a foundational aspect of these projects and of Reggio Emilia. Think of a time when you were the most challenged and inspired toward personal growth. Did it happen when you were receiving one-way directions from a supervisor? Or has it happened more frequently when you are in a group setting of hardworking peers, all working together toward a goal? For most, it would be the latter. Working alongside peers, especially toward a goal everyone is passionate about, allows students to both shine in the areas where they may be drawn to, and it organically provides students with an opportunity to witness others growing educationally in a way in which they might not have explored themselves. This sort of exposure, coupled with the narration and guidance of the teacher, allows students more accessible pathways toward their own growth. In essence, cooperation builds knowledge. Using long-term projects, students are able to co-construct knowledge through discussions with their teachers and classmates, in turn, allowing students to acquire cognitive, physical, social, and language skills that may also allow them to gain independence and confidence. When we consider how this impacts their education as they move past their time in our center, we can see that this model allows students to discover their own intrinsic motivation for learning. This intrinsic motivation, meaning motivation that comes from them personally finding joy in education, will carry them forward even as they move to schools that do not utilize Reggio Emilia practices. Now we know the 6 key practices of Reggio Emilia. 1. The environment as the third teacher. 2. Recognizing, accepting, and appreciating the 100 languages of children. 3. Documentation. 4. The image of the competent, capable child. 5. Negotiated learning. And 6. Long-term projects. These practices not only inform our mission statement, but our vision statement as well. Our vision statement reads, "We envision a school where learning unfolds through wonder, collaboration, and the 100 languages of children. Grounded in respect, diversity, and shared responsibility, we honor each child's unique identity and celebrate the connections that shape their world. Through the practices of Reggio Emilia, we make our mission and vision a reality for our entire school family." Now that we understand this model of early childhood education, we know that, as educators at Little Learners, every day you should expect to see and facilitate children choosing materials independently, open-ended invitations or provocations instead of teacher-directed crafts, documentation posted in the classroom that includes photos and children's words, teachers asking questions more often than giving answers, projects that develop over days or weeks rather than ending in a single lesson, and respectful conversations with children and families. This concludes our overview of Little Learners Spectrum Center's vision and mission, as well as the Reggio Emilia model of early childhood education. Thank you very much.